So in 2022, I'm co-writing a libretto with Christos Chalkis called Watershed, The Death of Dr Duncan. So George Ian Ogilvy Duncan was the Adelaide University academic who was thrown in the river in 1972, March. And he drowned, and there was a lot of discussion about the fact that it was, even the Premier, Don Dunstan, said that there was a police cover-up, that they were members of the Vice Squad. And so we've written it's the 50th anniversary next year, and Christos and I, with Joseph Twist, who's a extraordinary Brisbane composer, have written an oratorio for Dr Duncan. So an oratorio is, the most famous oratorio is Handel's Messiah. So it's usually it's sort of like an opera, but it's particularly in commemoration. It's more to do with, valorising someone in death. And it has that sombre sort of tone. When we spoke to the Adelaide Advertiser, I said that our oratorio was Handel Goes to Mardi Gras because, obviously, because of the gay content. And it's because, we have updated it. But we also think it's quite radical, particularly at this time, to use what is kind of known as a religious form for to celebrate and commemorate the life of a gay man who was murdered. So an oratorio usually has principal singers. So we've got 5, as far as I know at the moment. 5, it might be 8, and there's a choir of 40 people. It's being directed by Neil Armfield, who's the artistic director of the Adelaide Festival, and he feels a particular cogency about this story because he himself is quite public about the fact that he was bashed at a beat in Sydney. So I guess it's that kind of there, but for the grace of God go I. And Duncan was a very religious man. I use that religious term quite openly. He was a very devout man, and so it's kind of a really interesting and important time to kind of attack that. What might I call it? The binary of the LGBT community against the religious community. There are many LGBTQI people who are religious or who have some sort of spiritual faith. And Duncan was murdered. His murderers, unhappily, have never been brought to justice either. So it's really important, and it's going to be, I think, amazing. Yeah. While it is a celebration, a commemoration of his death, it also looks at how that event triggered the homosexual law reform in Adelaide in 1975. They were the first state in the English-speaking world to legalise homosexual sex between consenting adults. So it set off homosexual law reform not just throughout Australia but throughout the world. So it's Duncan was the catalyst and the tragic catalyst for that. But yeah, the oratorio also looks at what the LGBTQI community in Adelaide did and how they agitated to get this law reform, and how frankly Adelaide was this place that was visionary enough to champion that. So yeah. So Barbara and the Camp Dogs is a rock musical road trip on stage that I co-wrote with Ursula Yovich, who is one of Australia's greatest performers. She has a singing voice that I think rivals the best in the world, and she plays Barbara, who's she's a character who I think all of us have got a Barbara in our life. There's someone who create chaos whenever you're with them. They're incredibly exciting, they're wonderfully vivacious, but they're also very chaotic, and they've often got a lot of demons. And Ursula said to me, I think it was the 2009 Helpmann Awards, and my play Parramatta Girls had been nominated, but I hadn't won. And as Ursula tells it, I was sulking in the corner. at the after party, and she started performing this character called Barbara, who was just like the tough love friend you need in that moment. And she was making me laugh so much, and we just talked about writing a part for Ursula as Barbara. She sort of always calls her sort of her muse, a character that she carries inside her. And so we did, and it's just been one of the great joys of my life. I mean, in recent years, actually, I have been doing more and more co-writing, particularly with Indigenous artists. I've co-written Wudjang, Not the Past, with Stephen Page, after like a 10-year relationship with him and Bangarra. So I don't know, I think for your students, it's really interesting to abandon the idea of, I don't know, the kind of the soul genius, you know what I mean? Playwriting, making theatre is very much more, and has always been for some time, all through my career, about collaborating with other people who make theatre. But now even more, you're starting to see co-writing and libretto writing, and yeah, I do think that is a trend that your students would do well to avail themselves of. Yeah. And I am always amazed by how quickly students go to that sort of the negative version of what co-writing is about. I mean, when I was with Ursula, we just used to laugh, make filthy jokes with each other and pass the computer back and forth. And, that was the way Barbara got written. Now, that's not to say that Ursula and my instincts after being theatre makers for so long are not incredibly highly tuned. Do you know what I mean? So it's not just about that, but I guess I always emphasise the notion of the play in Playwright, like that we do play, that we laughed a lot. Ursula would say something and then she'd say, I can't put that in, and we'd go, yes, let's put it in. So it's always about, like, co-writing sometimes is about daring the other person to go to a place that their self-editor stops them from going. And that's been the case with Christos too. I mean, Christos is an incredibly provocative writer, and it's not, like, he laughs to me, he says, well, you're not exactly not, Alana. But it's more just pushing knowing each other's strengths and pushing each other's areas of kind of tentative courage. Yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, I think you have to be temperamentally given to it. I think that someone who's less sure than me or more finding their feet, I mean, it may be the right way for your students to go first out of the gate, like I can talk about experiences I had of collaborating at UTS that maybe set me up for that kind of philosophy. But yeah, look, it's something to think about and see whether it's you. Some people need to go into their own little cave, and in fact, different projects will send you into your own little cave or not. So it's kind of horses for courses, yeah. The moment at UTS that I can tell you about collaborating was at 2SER when I worked in a collective called 12-Inch Shoes. And 12-Inch Shoes was based on a Fats Wallace song called Your Feet's Too Big, and he would sing in it. And so we called the program 12-Inch Shoes, and that was the theme song. And it was this incredibly, now that I think back on it, anarchic kind of thing where we would just create a subject, and then everyone in the collective, there are about sort of 7 of us, would go out and do an interview or write a song or just make some contribution that was sometimes very tenuously attached to this sort of subject, to this idea that drove it. But it made for incredibly innovative radio, and I think it actually taught me really early that meaning is created by the collision of things, not just like kind of what you're saying it is. And so, yeah, I think that radio is actually an incredibly collaborative medium. So that's the example I'd give from UTS. Yeah. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Communications, and my majors are in radio production and professional writing. It was creative writing, I think we did journalism, we did advertising, We did the full spectrum actually of professional writing. We did some TV writing, I think. I took quite a lot of poetry classes, but I also took some journalism classes, and luckily for me, I also think I did an advertising course, so because I went straight out of university into advertising. So I got a traineeship from the Advertising Federation of Australia for 9 months, and it was at Monaghan, Damon and Adams, which was Philip Adams's small boutique advertising agency. And in the 9 months, you went through the full spectrum of the company. So I started in media, which is the floor where they sell all the advertising, and then I went up into management, where they deal with all the clients and take briefs. The last 3 months I was in the copywriting in the creative area, and at the end of the 9 months they offered me a job, so I stayed on in advertising for another 9 months, so 18 months, nearly 2 years altogether. And it's really interesting because a lot of people I know went to film school, and they kind of learnt to, if I can say that, they learnt to find their vision and their voice. Whereas I learnt in advertising how to listen to other people's needs and to take a brief and to use my creativity to express, well, in that case, sort of commercially creative ideas. But I profoundly believe that it was an extraordinary kind of grounding for a professional writer now, because what I do is work with communities and I valorize their voices in kind of, a completely different way, but in a way that's about listening and thinking, how can I put my heart and my voice into this brief that I'm being given? So yeah, so that's what happened. I was the co-editor of the student newspaper, which at that stage was called Newswit. And my co-editors were Amanda Collins, who has gone on to be the executive producer of Q&A and a highly acclaimed journalist in her own right, and another student called Kerry Brown, who also has been a trailblazer. So I was sort of tutored in that role by Jenna Price and John Kavanagh, who were the editors just before us, and I loved learning from her. I loved being the editor of the student newspaper. It made me, again, have to be interested in things that I had, some small interest in, but had to apply my skills and my intellect to that was right outside my purview. And that's one of the things I would also urge your students to do is to not stick just to what you know and what you think, because in some ways stretching yourself into these, you think, do I really want to write about what's happening in Eritrea at the moment? I have a kind of moral interest in it, but do I want to actually write about it? Well, yeah, let's go in there and see what I can do and what I can write and how I can create a story that's not something that's absolutely where I would have thought I would be interested. So yeah, that is something that I think UTS and university is a great thing to do, to stretch yourself in that way. Yeah. So Bangarra in the 2022 Sydney Festival are presenting a show called Wudjang, Not the Past. And I've been working with Bangarra as a dramaturg for about 10 years, and people always say, well, what does a dramaturg really do with dance? And it's really interesting because people do think of playwrights as writing the dialogue, and I always say, you know what, the dialogue is one aspect of the thinking that you do that is about creating a structure. A playwright is basically an architect of dramatic action. And so what you do when you're a dramaturg at a dance company is speak with the choreographer and the artistic director, which is in this case the incredible Stephen Page, and you sort of talk about how you're structuring the dance and what it's saying. Even in really abstract form, you still need to have a structure. So in 2017, I think it was, Stephen and I have been working together for a while, and he decided he wanted to do the story of Bennelong. People will know it was a man from the Sydney Eora region. And sometimes we would have long sessions talking about the show, and rather than send him notes, I would send him a poem, because it was he's a busy man, so I'd send him a poem sort of summarising what we talked about. And some of those poems found their way into the show as lyrics, Stephen showed them to the composer, who's the incredible Steve Francis. And so this time we thought, well, why don't we not do it as a sort of just an accidental use of text? Why don't we try and have some, this is Stephen's vision, of course, why don't we have performers on stage? We're going to have Elaine Crombie and Justin Smith and the incredible Jess Hitchcock and Kirk Page, and there's others, there's 5 musicians, and there's 18 Bangarra dancers. So it's going to be beautiful. But, it's really interesting. At the first production meeting, Stephen described me as a dramatist, a playwright, a dramaturg, and the keeper of Stephen's thoughts, which I think I really, that's my most cherished description, because, I don't have the cultural knowledge. I'm not writing it in the same sense as I would be. It's not my ideas or my vision. I'm working as a tool for Stephen to help shape it. And I love that. It's actually sometimes harder to do that, to be the tool that somebody uses. The Darug word for to dig is karma, and so in the Bennelong program I said I was Stephen's karmaturg, I was his digging tool, not his dramaturg. So again, for students, I think try to get involved in situations where it doesn't have to be your vision. It can actually also be about you facilitating with your crafts someone else's ideas. So I've worked in this form verbatim, which people will know is about working with community. One of the definitions I give of verbatim is that you bring the community along with you. I usually have the community there on opening night. I have actually written a whole book about this called Bowerbird, if anybody's interested in reading it, because people used to say to me, how do you do what you do, Alana? And I would say, well, I actually need more than 5 minutes to tell you. But to answer the question of, what has been the most valuable lesson learned, the one I would mention to students is look to the community or the person themselves as your way to cope with the trauma of what some of these stories can uncover. So when I did a show called Letters to Lindy, which was about the 20,000 letters held in the National Library of Australia, written by members of the public to Lindy, Chamberlain, Creighton. Since 1980, some of your students may not know the name Lindy, Chamberlain, Creighton, but they will know the dingo took my baby. That everybody knows that saying, they know that story. And so I made a theatre piece using some of the 20,000 letters and interviewing Lindy, Chamberlain, Creighton, and putting a monologue through the centre of the work, which was her voice. And for a story that's been told by so many other people, Lindy used to laugh at me and say to me, I can say it because she said it to me, this is the closest to my story because it's my version of it. It's literally my words. But what I started saying was that I learnt from Lindy how to deal with the horror of parts of that story. So in the archive, about 95% of it, people would be surprised, most of it is supportive of Lindy. The 5% that's not is the kind of the bottom of the bird cage of human nature. It is the horror, pornographic images sent to her, nasty letters, red texter, murderer, that kind of horrible stuff. But only a very small percentage of the collection, but I still looked at it. And Lindy said to me, oh yeah, that's the comic relief. you know. And she said she used to laugh at it because after, like, you know, people would send her Bible verses, and Lindy's an extremely religious woman, but she said, you know, it got a bit sort of, you know, just a bit the same. And she'd say that the nasty letters she would treat as this, oh, look, this is a bit different. Look at this dumb person. They've actually put their name and address on the back, and they'll send her a Christmas card, dear Lindy, you're a witch and you should be hung, kind of thing. It would be like she taught me how to deal with it. And it was the same when I wrote my play about the Parramatta girls. Those women, they taught me how to deal with the pain and the horror. So, you know, to your students, if you are interested in verbatim, or I call it close work actually in my book, because my editor said to me, Alana, the verbatim you do is a little bit different to the normal. It's not transcript based verbatim. I call it massage verbatim. But yeah, she said it's also called close work. I came up with that phrase because I keep the community close. I caution students, sometimes when you speak to someone who hasn't talked about something traumatic for 30 years or whatever, there's this thing that happens and it's called transmitted trauma. I mean, you know, your students might be more aware of it now. But if you talk to a Vietnam veteran or someone who's been in an institution, or even someone who's just telling you something that they may not have told their closest friend, you need to take strategies to know that they're going to be all right, because we're not counsellors, we're storytellers. So make sure they're connected to other people, that you know that when the sort of, I call it the horrors in the middle of the night come, you know, sort of telling them, should I have said that or whatever, you know that they've got someone to talk to. But also for yourself, watch how they deal with their trauma. Do they talk to a lot of other people? Do they talk to one special person? You know, take your cue from the community is my biggest lesson. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I loved radio. I loved radio much more than, well, not much more than, but as much as writing. I had 3 programs on 2SER that I can remember. One was called Night Owls, which was another student and me on a Wednesday night, and it was like at 10 o'clock, and we just basically used to play punk records for 3 hours. Her name was Tracy, and she was right up to the minute. She had every sort of import from England particularly, but also from America, and it was just fun. And then I have spoken about 12-inch shoes, which is kind of what I would call a documentary drama program, one of the earliest I can imagine. And there were a lot of collaborators with that, students involved, but also we kept it going once we'd stopped being at UTS. And then the one that I'm probably most proud of was a program called Fable Follies, which was, we used to get children's books from Australian children's book publishers, and we would come in on the Sunday morning and we'd mark it up and work out, they had a little team of volunteer actors, and we'd mark up who was going to read what and the sort of funny voices that they were going to do. And we used to do, you know, Foley sound effects, like we'd just bring in this little bag full of things that we could use as sound effects. And it was incredibly, like, we didn't do lots of planning. We would just come in at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I think we'd record the program like by 11. So we gave ourselves 2 hours to sort of gussy up the story, to find all the funny voices. And we did that every week for years. And it was a children's radio drama program, you know. You know, you asked me what funny sounds we could have, I mean, I can't remember now. I know there was a lot of funny mouth noises and things with carrots and things with vegetables would also make, vegetables turn out to be incredibly noisy things. And yeah, we would just like, because kids just like, they just like noises that sound like farts and things like that, isn't it? So, you know, like when we were really scraping the barrel, we just made fart noises. I mean, honestly, we really had a lot of fun, but I think that it showed that radio could be a medium which, because at that time children's television was much more dominant, and radio was considered this thing that had happened in old days and children, you know, didn't really listen to. But now, of course, we see the explosion of podcasts for children, and they love it. So it's always about, as a student, kind of looking at, I always think, take what somebody's saying you can't do and then do it. So after UTS, as I said, I went into advertising for quite some time, but much later I went and worked at ABC Radio in the radio drama department. So that spontaneous creativity that I did at 2SER really stood me in great stead. I was never a fussy, control freak kind of producer. I would be like, let's try something, and if it works, hey, that's great, and if it's not, yeah, let's just do something else. So, you know, I think that's really good grounding. One of the other things I did for 2SER was a marketing campaign. It was called Radio with a Point, which was a slogan that I came up with. And I commissioned a visual artist to do this beautiful picture of an echidna. It was kind of a graphic, like almost like a screen print, like that I would do today. And yeah, they put it on stickers, and it was fun. It was really about trying to convince people outside just the student group to listen to 2SER, which of course now, I mean, 2SER is this community leader in terms of the kind of groups and the voices that it has on there. So I'm very proud of the work that I did on 2SER, yeah.